The laughter cut through the marble hall like glass. It was a sound polished smooth by privilege, and it echoed brutally in the high, vaulted ceilings of the gilded plate. This was not the joyous sound of celebration, but the cruel, careless mockery of those who believe the world is their stage. The scene unfolds on a silent Tuesday evening, the kind of quiet hour when true character is often revealed. The dining room itself is a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers drip light onto gold-rimmed plates, and the scent of truffle oil hangs heavy in the air. Yet, beneath the veneer of luxury, a coldness permeates. Clara Hayes, 24, moved through this space like a ghost, her simple black uniform a stark contrast to the opulence. She carried a silver tray laden with champagne flutes, her movements learned, precise, and utterly invisible to the patrons who saw her only as a function, not a person. Tonight, however, she became terribly visible. A prominent table occupied by a group of well-dressed, loud stockbrokers had deliberately blocked her path. Their conversation was a torrent of crude boasts and dismissive gestures. One of them, a man whose expensive watch caught the chandelier's light, extended his hand not to reach for a glass, but to emphasize a point in his story. His ring grazed the delicate rim of a flute, a subtle, almost imperceptible contact. My breath caught. I knew what was coming before the sound even registered. The flute tipped, and the expensive brut champagne spilled across the marble floor, a sudden, sparkling puddle reflecting the distant lights. It happened slowly, yet too fast. The liquid pooled near the polished leather shoe of the stockbroker, who then looked down at the mess with an air of theatrical outrage. He hadn't spilled it. She had. His eyes, cold and bored, rose to meet Clara's, but his gaze went through her as if she were a fault in the architecture. The man didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. That was the most devastating part. He simply sighed, a sound of profound disappointment reserved for a poorly cooked meal or a misplaced order. Honestly, must we employ the help who moves with the grace of a donkey on ice? Clean this up quickly, and bring a fresh bottle. You'll be paying for this one, of course. His words were casual, devastating. The table erupted in controlled, condescending laughter, the sound that cut through the marble. I felt the heat rising in my face, a desperate physical flush of shame that threatened to overwhelm me. My hands, trained to be steady, trembled slightly. This wasn't about the champagne, it was about the ritual humiliation, the constant reminder of my place. I could hear their whispers. They were dissecting me like a failed experiment. So simple, they muttered. No polish, no class. These people shouldn't even be allowed to breathe the same air. Mr. Adler, the restaurant manager, appeared from the shadows, his face a mask of practiced disdain. He was the personification of the restaurant's cold elegance, slicked back hair, a suit tailored to cruel perfection, and eyes that only saw profit and potential loss. He didn't look at the customer, he looked only at me. His silent scrutiny was 1,000 times worse than the customer's insult. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. In his world, the server was always the one at fault. Adler approached the table, not to defend, but to apologize for me. My deepest apologies, Mr. Harrington. A momentary lapse in judgment. It won't happen again. The house will, of course, cover the replacement. His voice was smooth as oil, but the message was a poison directed at me. He waited until the customer was placated with a nod, then leaned into Clara, his voice dropping to a vicious, controlled whisper that only she could hear. Clara, you are a liability. One more mistake, and you are out. I don't pay you to be clumsy. I pay you to be invisible. I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. I couldn't afford to lose this job. Not now. I dropped to my knees, gathering the shattered glass and the spilled costly fluid. The shards felt cold and sharp in my hands, a physical manifestation of the invisible wounds I carried. I wiped the floor clean, meticulously, trying to disappear into the sheen of the marble. When I stood up, My back straight, my gaze level, I offered a silent, formal nod to Mr. Harrington. The man barely acknowledged it, already engrossed in his next boast. I retreated to the back, to the solitude of the dishwashing station. My only ally in this gleaming hell was Nina, a fellow server whose eyes met mine with a flicker of shared indignation. She didn't need to say anything. The look was enough. I saw it. I know it wasn't your fault. That small, silent connection was my only lifeline. I stood there, staring at my reflection in the polished steel of a gigantic serving platter. Who was I really in this place? A smudge on their perfect canvas? A necessary evil? The answer was a cold weight in my gut. But as I watched the water from the faucet rinse away the tiny remnants of champagne, washing the silver clean, a different feeling began to surface beneath the shame. A quiet, terrifying resolve. They could humiliate me, they could dismiss me, but they could not break the conviction that was slowly hardening inside my core. The scene freezes on Clara's reflection. Her eyes, though still holding a trace of the recent sting, are no longer defeated. They are burning with a quiet question, a silent challenge to the arrogant world around her. What will happen to her? The air in the staff room, thick with the smell of detergent and desperation, offered no true sanctuary. It was just another polished cage in the gilded plate's meticulously curated environment. The silence following the champagne incident was almost worse than the event itself. Mr. Adler followed Clara into the back, his footsteps unnervingly quiet on the linoleum floor, a predator stalking his prey. He cornered her near the linen press, the white towels towering over them, ironically representing the pristine standard she was perpetually failing to meet. "Your lack of aptitude is a reflection of your station, Clara," Adler began, his voice low, measured, and infinitely cruel. "You think kindness makes up for clumsiness. It does not. This is a 5-star establishment. The clients are not here for your sweet smile. They are here for flawlessness. You are the flaw." He paused, allowing his words to sink in, each syllable a calculated blow. He gestured sharply toward a pristine, untouched stack of napkins. "You spend too much time observing them, pitying them, or worse, caring for them. You should be focused on the execution. Your life is outside that dining room. Your work is here. Keep the two separate." Clara didn't raise her voice. She didn't even flinch. She simply held his gaze, a dangerous, quiet dignity emanating from her. "I was observing, Mr. Adler. I observe how Mr. Harrington always orders the 59 Merlot, but never finishes the second glass. I observe how Mrs. Albright is allergic to almonds, even though her husband insists on the amaretto mousse. I observe, sir, so I can anticipate, not so I can be clumsy." The truth was a sharp weapon, but one she could not fully wield without consequences. Adler's controlled demeanor cracked for a fraction of a second. He was accustomed to silent compliance, not insightful defense. "Anticipation is my job, Clara. Yours is to carry the dishes and keep quiet. You are simple, and simplicity has no place here. Go back out there, and for God's sake try to look less poor." He dismissed her with a flick of his wrist, the gesture itself a profound act of disrespect, embodying the systemic arrogance of the establishment. She went back into the dining room, her resolve hardening. The weight of his words felt like a second, heavier uniform. She understood the true nature of the battle now. It wasn't about competence, it was about class. Her simplicity, her inherent kindness, was seen as a weakness, a fundamental inability to belong to the gilded world she served. The peak of the public humiliation arrived an hour later during the dinner rush. The same stockbroker, Mr. Harrington, was hosting a dinner with potential investors, a high-stakes, tense affair. Clara was assigned to their table. She moved with heightened caution, every step calculated, every placement of silverware perfect. Yet perfection was exactly what they were waiting to tear down. Mr. Harrington, feeling the pressure of the deal, needed a target, a release valve for his own anxiety. He requested a specific vintage of Bordeaux, a bottle known for its delicate cork. Clara presented the bottle flawlessly, cut the foil cleanly, and prepared to extract the cork with the utmost care. But as she began the slow, twisting motion, Harrington's eyes, fueled by alcohol and entitlement, locked onto hers. He started to detail a story to his colleagues, an anecdote about a restaurant fail he had witnessed years ago, a story about a server whose nervousness caused them to break the cork, ruining a $1,000 bottle. He described the server's face, the shame, the pathetic apology, his voice dripping with theatrical revulsion. He didn't mention Clara's name, but the story was told to her, over her head, while her concentration was at its most critical. The air thickened. The entire table, knowing the subtle power dynamic at play, paused their conversations to watch the inevitable outcome. Clara felt the cork resisting, felt the wood of the ancient cork beginning to stress under the pressure. The silence was absolute, a silent stadium waiting for a single, humiliating snap. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape. Don't drop it. Don't break it. Don't give them this. It wasn't just the cork. It was the cork of her dignity. The cork held, slowly releasing its grip on the glass. The rich, earthy smell of the Bordeaux finally bloomed in the air. She had done it. Harrington, visibly annoyed by her success, searched for another avenue of attack. He peered into his empty water glass, then looked pointedly at Clara. "Waitress," he called, the term itself laced with a derogatory inflection. "Your uniform. Look at it." Clara looked down. The uniform, meticulously clean, had a minuscule, almost invisible speck of dust near the cuff. It was nothing, less than nothing. "Unacceptable," he declared, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "It shows a lack of respect for the environment and for my guests. If you cannot even maintain a simple piece of fabric, how can I trust you with my wine?" He reached out a finger, slowly and deliberately flicked the tiny speck of dust away, then wiped his fingertip on the table's white linen napkin. The entire motion was designed to be a public theatrical performance of disgust. His colleagues chuckled, a low, poisonous sound. Clara simply nodded. She couldn't speak. The injustice was so blatant, so petty, that defending herself would only fuel their cruel enjoyment. But Nina, who had been passing by with a water pitcher, stopped. Her hand tightened on the handle, her knuckles white. She caught Clara's eye and gave the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of the head, a silent command: "Hold your fire. Don't let them see your pain." They laughed when she dropped the tray, but no one laughed when she picked up the courage. The moment Harrington dismissed her with a wave, Clara turned on her heel and walked away, her back straight, her stride even. It took a monumental effort to maintain that composure, to not rush out the nearest exit and never look back. The entire dining room had witnessed the scene, the arrogance of the customer, the complicity of the setting, and the sheer, brutal unfairness of it all. As she entered the swinging door of the kitchen, she felt the eyes of every person on her. Not just the staff, but a few quiet patrons who had seen the whole spectacle. For the first time, the humiliation wasn't just a wound, it was a rallying point. The audience, now fully invested, shared her quiet rage. They were emotionally on her side, silently demanding justice for the girl who was too simple for their gilded world. The walk home was a pilgrimage of exhaustion. The city air, usually a chaotic balm, felt cold and indifferent against Clara's flushed cheeks. She left the gleaming facade of the gilded plate, exchanging the scent of expensive wine and polished brass for the honest, gritty smell of the urban night. She lived in a small, third-floor walk-up apartment, a sanctuary of simple necessity. The contrast between her two worlds was a physical ache, the vast, cavernous dining room and the tiny, one-room space that was entirely hers. She didn't turn on the main light. The ambient glow from a street lamp filtering through the single window was enough. It cast long, dramatic shadows across the worn wooden floor, creating a lonely, introspective space. She peeled off the black uniform, the fabric feeling tainted, heavy with the weight of Adler's scorn and Harrington's casual cruelty. She threw it into the laundry hamper, a gesture of quiet repudiation. I saw a maid. They saw a function. But I saw the promise I made to my mother. That night, sitting on the edge of her simple bed, Clara allowed the facade of professional composure to crumble. The tears didn't stream down her face. They were the slow, difficult kind, born not of weakness, but of accumulated, unexpressed grief and rage. She felt the sharp, familiar pang of loneliness, the burden of fighting a war no one else knew she was waging. They think I am simple. They think I am poor. They don't know what I am trying to build. She reached for a small, lacquered wooden box, kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard, a secret place for a sacred memory. It was old, scratched, and held the only tangible link to the past that fueled her grueling present. Opening the box was like stepping into a different kind of silence, a silence filled with her mother's voice. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was the symbol, a single, tarnished silver teaspoon. It was cheap, utilitarian, and utterly out of place in the opulent world of the gilded plate. The spoon was not just a relic, it was the entire story. It was the last object her mother, Eliza Hayes, a meticulous and proud pastry chef who had worked her entire life in small, honest bakeries, had given her. Eliza had passed away suddenly 3 years prior, leaving Clara with crippling medical debts and a single profound inheritance, an unwavering belief in the dignity of service. "Service isn't about being invisible, Clara," her mother's voice echoed in her memory, a clear, warm counterpoint to Adler's venom. "It's about seeing the person, not the paycheck. This spoon, it's simple, yes? But it delivers the sweetness. Never forget, the hand that serves must be steady, and the heart that serves must be true. They can take everything, but they can't take your integrity." Clara picked up the spoon, tracing the faint engraved initial E on the handle with her thumb. It was cold, metallic and real. This spoon represented the tiny, unseen details of hospitality, the perfect temperature of the coffee, the way the pastry was dusted just so, the subtle, anticipatory kindness that truly elevates an experience. Mr. Adler saw flaws in the uniform. Clara saw a future built on genuine connection. The spoon was her blueprint. She remembered the humiliation from hours before, the flickering image of Harrington's condescending finger flicking dust. The memory was a fresh surge of adrenaline. The elegant ones are the ones who make others feel comfortable, not small. That was the central contradiction of the gilded plate. It was designed to make most people feel small, to separate the gold from the dust. In a moment of pure, raw introspection, Clara walked over to her small, outdated laptop, which rested on a makeshift desk constructed from 2 crates and a plank of wood. She turned it on. The screen glowed, illuminating a complex financial spreadsheet that was open, filled with endless columns of numbers, business plans, and loan amortization schedules. The files were titled Project Nightingale, Phase 1 Acquisition. The public saw her shame. They didn't see the architect, the waitressing job, the humiliations, the long hours. It wasn't just survival, it was research. Every sneer from Adler, every unreasonable demand from a client was a piece of market data. She was meticulously studying the flaws in the luxury service industry, the gap between the price paid and the respect delivered. She was learning what not to do. She had been saving every spare penny, working triple shifts and studying business finance online until 3 a.m., all to fund the promise symbolized by that cheap, tarnished spoon. She looked from the sophisticated financial model on the screen to the simple spoon in her hand. The juxtaposition was startling. The raw, honest past meeting the calculated, formidable future. The pain was still there, but now it was refined, transmuted into focused energy. Clara closes the box and places the spoon back underneath the floorboard. She stands up, the single shaft of moonlight illuminating her face. Her expression is no longer one of victimhood, but of fierce, quiet determination. She is ready to fight, not with arrogance, but with the very kindness and dignity they mocked. The audience now understands the stakes are monumental and the plan is already in motion. They know she will react, but the how remains a powerful, compelling mystery. The next morning arrived with the harsh clarity of an alarm clock cutting through a restless sleep. The weight of going back to the gilded plate felt heavier than the weight of her entire financial debt. The morning shift was often quieter, but the silence only amplified the lingering toxicity from the night before. Clara dressed mechanically, moving through the motions of preparing for war in a kitchen, a battle waged with grace and silent service. They thought I was weak. Maybe I was, until that day. The temptation to simply call in sick, to let the exhaustion and the humiliation win, was almost overwhelming. Why endure this? Why let them chip away at my soul every single day? Her reflections were sharp, short internal skirmishes waged between self-preservation and commitment. I can quit. I can find a simpler job where the uniform doesn't feel like a shroud, but the image of the tarnished silver spoon, the promise to her mother, flashed in her mind, a silent, non-negotiable contract. The difference between surviving and winning, Clara, she recalled her mother saying, is knowing which doors to walk through and which ones to kick down. This job wasn't the goal. It was the entry point. Every insult was a lesson. Every arrogant client was a textbook in poor leadership. If she quit now, the data would be incomplete and the promise broken. At the Gilded Plate, the day started with a staff meeting, a daily ritual presided over by Mr. Adler, designed less for communication and more for intimidation. Adler's eyes swept the room, pausing briefly and deliberately on Clara. "I expect perfection today," he announced, his voice clipped. "There will be no margin for error. We are hosting a critical investor lunch." He then launched into a veiled but obvious critique of the previous night's lapses, hammering home the theme of unprofessional simplicity. Clara stood silent, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. She allowed the harsh words to wash over her, a shield of indifference replacing her earlier vulnerability. She was no longer hearing a manager scolding an employee. She was hearing an outdated business model condemning itself. He mistakes fear for respect. That is his greatest weakness. During the lunch prep, as the kitchen descended into its controlled chaos, she experienced a small, unexpected moment of connection, the vital external support that anchored her decision. Nina, her loyal colleague, walked past and, without looking at Clara, subtly slipped a folded piece of paper into her apron pocket. It was a silent gesture, a violation of the no personal talk rule, but one filled with profound empathy. Clara waited until she was momentarily alone, polishing silverware near a sun-drenched window before unfolding the note. It was a single, handwritten line. "We see the gold, they don't. Keep polishing." The message was brief, almost illegible, but its impact was seismic. It was a recognition. Nina didn't see a clumsy server who cost the restaurant a bottle of wine. She saw the integrity, the quiet strength. It was the moment someone else affirmed her fight. She wasn't truly alone. This wasn't just her battle. It was the battle of everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or treated as less than human by the system. Clara's resolve crystallized. She looked at the gleaming silverware in her hand, the expensive material a symbol of the world she was preparing to conquer. She closed her eyes for a brief, cleansing second, allowing the silence to settle her mind. I will not run. I will not hide. They have no power over me beyond what I choose to give them. The fear retreated, replaced by a cool, strategic determination. The decision was made. She wasn't just working for her mother's memory or for financial stability. She was working for the day when she could dismantle the very culture of arrogance and disrespect embodied by Adler and his privileged clientele. She wasn't going to quit the job. She was going to acquire the job. She was going to own the whole damn establishment. The scene ends on Clara's face, now devoid of doubt. She picks up a serving tray, her grip firm and steady. Her eyes are locked on the dining room doors. She steps through the threshold, no longer a ghost, but a warrior, moving towards the next inevitable confrontation. The internal struggle is over. She is ready for the external storm. The critical investor lunch was in full pressurized swing. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and expensive cologne. Mr. Harrington was back, occupying the central table, hosting a group of very serious, impeccably dressed executives whose expressions ranged from cautious to skeptical. The stakes for Harrington were clearly immense. He was visibly sweating beneath his tailored suit, his usual veneer of arrogance thin and brittle. Clara moved among the tables, her focus absolute. She was serving coffee and delicate petits fours, maintaining a quiet professionalism that belied the storm gathering inside her. She observed the body language, the micro-expressions, not just of the diners, but of the environment itself. The gilded plate felt taut, ready to snap under the stress of delivering perfection. And that's when they realized who she really was. The catalyst wasn't a dropped tray or a broken glass. It was a sudden, terrifying silence that cut through the low hum of conversation. One of the investors, a stern-faced woman named Miss Davies, suddenly clutched her throat. Her eyes went wide with panic, her breathing reduced to a series of ragged, wheezing gasps. She had accidentally taken a bite of a petit four containing walnuts, a severe known allergy that the kitchen had somehow, catastrophically, failed to flag on the ingredient list. Panic erupted at the table. Harrington, whose deal hung in the balance, instantly dissolved into useless, panicked shouting. "What's happening? A doctor! Someone call an ambulance!" He was focused entirely on the disaster, the potential ruin of his investment, not the woman choking before him. Mr. Adler rushed over, his face pale, concerned only with the liability and the damage to the restaurant's reputation. He fumbled for his phone, paralyzed by the enormity of the crisis. Miss Davies' face was rapidly turning ashen. She was silently drowning in a room full of noise. She desperately tried to point to her expensive leather briefcase resting on the floor, a plea that went unnoticed by the panicked men surrounding her. Clara, however, saw it. Her training, the constant observation and anticipation she had learned and refined, kicked in instantly, overriding her fear. Her mind didn't register the commotion or the potential risk to her job. It registered only the emergency. She pushed past the useless cluster of men, kneeling swiftly by Miss Davies' side. "I didn't see an investor. I saw a person in critical need, and I knew exactly what to do." "EpiPen," Clara stated, her voice sharp, clear, and commanding in the chaos. "She's pointing to her briefcase. Get it!" She looked directly at Nina, who stood frozen, witnessing the drama. Nina, recognizing the intensity in Clara's eyes, snapped into action, retrieving the case. Clara snatched the briefcase, finding the small, bright orange emergency kit inside. Harrington, still hyperventilating, tried to grab her arm. "What are you doing? Wait for an ambulance. You can't touch her," he yelled, his concern misplaced and driven by the fear of litigation. "There is no time," Clara retorted, her focus absolute. She expertly uncapped the auto-injector. She lifted Miss Davies' skirt just enough and plunged the needle firmly into her thigh. The small click of the device was the loudest, most critical sound in the entire room. The immediate relief was visible. Miss Davies gasped, a deep, rattling inhalation, the first true breath she had taken in a minute. The color slowly, painfully began to return to her lips. The crisis was averted, thanks to the swift, decisive action of the simple waitress. The room, which moments before had been a cacophony of fear, fell into an astonishing, absolute silence. Everyone was staring, not at the saved woman, but at Clara. Mr. Adler stood slack-jawed, his phone still in his hand, the emergency services number undialed. Harrington leaned back, his self-importance shattered, his face a complex map of shock, relief, and profound embarrassment. He had been loud, panicked, and utterly useless. Clara had been quiet, focused, and the only person capable of action. Clara gently helped Miss Davies settle, her voice soft now, professional, returning to the core of service. "The ambulance is still coming, ma'am. Just breathe slowly." She then stood up, her uniform slightly rumpled from kneeling, but her posture entirely composed. Harrington finally spoke, his voice a bewildered whisper. How did you know to do that? And how did you know where the pen was?" Clara looked directly at him, her gaze unwavering, embodying the quiet power of knowledge over noise. He spoke one sentence, and the entire boardroom froze. "I knew, Mr. Harrington," Clara said, her voice clear and measured, "because 3 weeks ago, during an early breakfast service, I saw Miss Davies check the ingredient list of a simple fruit bowl for tree nuts. I saw her briefly fumble with the small, bright orange pouch on the table before placing it in her briefcase. I remembered the exact location, because that is my job, to anticipate the needs and, yes, the vulnerabilities of my clients. I serve by observing the details others consider beneath them." She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply stated the truth, a truth that exposed the shallow, self-centered blindness of every person in that room who saw only a transaction, not a human being. Her simple service had just saved a life, and ironically, Harrington's deal. The revelation was a punch to the gut of their collective arrogance. The woman they had humiliated and dismissed as simple was the only one with the presence of mind, the compassion, and the detailed knowledge to save the day. The secret wasn't a document or a financial plan yet. The secret was the true, profound value of kindness and observation. The scene holds on the uncomfortable, deafening silence. The truth has been exposed, and the audience feels the massive, cathartic satisfaction of seeing the tables finally begin to turn. The silence following Clara's explanation was not merely the absence of sound, it was a heavy, suffocating admission of guilt and shame. Mr. Harrington, the usually booming caricature of financial confidence, looked small, his expensive shirt clinging to his back with cold sweat. Mr. Adler, who had preached the virtue of flawlessness, was exposed as utterly paralyzed in the face of genuine crisis. Ms. Davies, now resting and receiving oxygen from the arrived paramedics, managed a weak but firm hand squeeze to Clara's arm. It was a gesture of profound, silent gratitude, a debt that wealth could never fully repay. Clara accepted the thanks with quiet dignity, then retreated to a corner, allowing the medical professionals to take over. She was, once again, trying to become invisible, but now the invisibility was impossible. The same room that witnessed her humiliation now waited for her words. The other investors, now gathered in hushed groups, watched Clara with a mixture of shock and awe. They had witnessed a pure act of service, the kind that transcends a paycheck. They had seen the true cost of arrogance, which had rendered their host and their manager useless, and the true power of empathy, which had saved a life. Harrington approached her tentatively, his polished shoes scuffing slightly on the marble floor. The bravado was gone, replaced by a nervous, twitchy humiliation. He cleared his throat several times before speaking, the words difficult and grating. "Clara," he began, stumbling over her name, a recognition he rarely afforded the help. "What you did, it was extraordinary. I owe you a significant debt. You saved Miss Davies, and frankly, you probably saved my deal." He reached into his inner pocket, pulling out a thick money clip, ready to default to the only language he truly understood: transaction. "Name your price. Consider this a substantial bonus." "My sincere thanks." Clara looked at the money clip, not with disdain, but with quiet assessment. She didn't flinch. She kept her hands steady, folded neatly over her apron. She knew that true redemption didn't come from a monetary transaction. It came from a change of heart, a recognition of human worth. "Mr. Harrington," Clara replied, her voice steady and respectful, yet carrying a new, formidable authority. "I don't require payment for seeing a person in need. I was performing my job, which, as I understand it, is to serve the well-being and comfort of your guests. My reward is knowing that Miss Davies is breathing." She paused, then delivered the final poetic blow, not in anger, but in fact. "The only thing I ask is that you remember, the next time you speak to someone who serves you, we are not extensions of the furniture. We are professionals who observe, anticipate, and care." The money clip remained suspended in Harrington's hand, his offering rejected. The rejection was more powerful than any acceptance could have been. It highlighted his own shallow, transactional view of the world. He swallowed hard, unable to meet her gaze. He simply nodded, a silent admission of his deep-seated error, his arrogance publicly shamed by her grace. Mr. Adler finally found his voice, stepping forward, attempting to reclaim authority and spin the crisis into a win. "Clara, this was exceptional thinking. This is exactly the kind of initiative we need. This secures your position." Clara turned to Adler, cutting him off with a single level look. She didn't need to shout. The inversion of power was complete. "My position, Mr. Adler," she said calmly, "is to ensure the restaurant operates with integrity. The kitchen failed to communicate a severe allergen risk. That is not initiative. That is basic safety negligence. And had I not been observing the details beneath me, that failure would have cost a life and your reputation." She didn't wait for his response. Her composure was the new verdict. She collected the discarded remnants of the ruined dessert, a deliberate return to her task. But now she performed the action not as an invisible servant, but as the quiet heroine. The entire staff, including Nina, who was watching with glowing pride, understood the shift. Clara was no longer the liability. She was the conscience and the competence the restaurant desperately lacked. The room, full of people who had looked down on her, now looked up to her, waiting for her next move. The immediate shock of the near tragedy slowly faded, replaced by an uneasy, lingering tension. Miss Davies, stabilizing under medical care, insisted on a private conversation with Clara before being taken to the hospital for observation. They met in the deserted private dining room, a space usually reserved for the most exclusive and powerful. Now, it was the stage for a reckoning based on integrity, not wealth. Miss Davies, a woman of sharp, discerning intelligence, looked at Clara with new, deeply respectful eyes. "You saved my life, Clara, but more than that, you demonstrated the kind of attention to detail and proactive care that my firm, Vanguard Capital, values above all else." She paused, her voice regaining its strength. "I run the Hospitality and Acquisition Division. We were, ironically, scoping out the gilded plate, but the culture, the arrogance, was already proving a major red flag. She gestured around the luxurious empty room. "This restaurant is financially struggling, Clara. High overhead, terrible staff retention, and a management that views clients as wallets, not people. Vanguard Capital is planning a leveraged buyout to revitalize the space, but we need new leadership, someone who understands true hospitality." They laughed at her once. Now they thank her in silence. The air in the room crackled with the sheer magnitude of the proposition. Clara, the waitress threatened with termination just hours ago, now sat across from the woman who held the restaurant's fate in her hands. Miss Davies pushed a meticulously organized file across the polished mahogany table. It was titled Acquisition Proposal and Management Transition Plan. "Vanguard has been tracking your performance, Clara, through quiet inquiries long before today. Your kindness, your consistent high ratings in the hidden feedback systems, those weren't weaknesses. They were data points. You are the embodiment of the ethical service this industry desperately needs. My proposal is simple. Vanguard will complete the acquisition, and we want you, with full financial backing and autonomy, to step into the role of Chief Operating Officer. You will rebuild this establishment from the ground up, based on the principle of respect. You will bring the soul back to the service." Clara's heart pounded, a deep, rhythmic drumbeat of destiny realized. This wasn't a job. It was the ultimate vindication of her mother's ethos. It was the chance to build Project Nightingale on a massive ethical scale. She didn't hesitate. "I accept, Ms. Davies, but my first executive action must be to address the systemic disrespect that nearly cost your life." The scene cuts to the following afternoon. A critical all-staff meeting is convened, mandatory for every employee, including Mr. Adler and Mr. Harrington, who had been summoned back under the pretense of a formal apology to the staff. Adler stood at the front, attempting to project confidence, entirely unaware that the stage was set for his downfall. The doors opened, and in walked Clara, no longer in the crumpled black uniform, but dressed in a sharp, elegant charcoal suit that radiated quiet authority. She was accompanied by Ms. Davies, now officially introduced as the new principal owner of the holding company that had just finalized the acquisition of the Gilded Plate. The murmurs quickly died as Ms. Davies stepped forward, her gaze sweeping the stunned room. As the new owners, Vanguard Capital is committed to a culture where excellence is defined by integrity and respect. To lead this critical transition, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing your new Chief Operating Officer, Ms. Clara Hayes. The shock was palpable. Adler's face drained of all color, his polished arrogance crumbling into pure, unadulterated fear. Harrington, standing rigid near the back, looked utterly defeated, the realization of his past insults crashing down on him. Nina, however, let out a small, quiet gasp of pure, tearful joy. Clara walked to the center of the room, her silver teaspoon promise now fulfilled. She addressed the room, her voice steady and deliberate, devoid of triumph or malice. She was simply stating facts. "Mr. Adler," Clara began, her eyes meeting his. "You operated this business on fear and treated your staff and often your clients with disdain, mistaking arrogance for elegance. You were given every opportunity to lead with empathy, yet you chose cruelty. Effective immediately, your services are terminated, not out of malice, but because your philosophy fundamentally contradicts the ethical foundation of this new company." Adler began to splutter an appeal, mentioning his years of experience, but Clara cut him off with a single firm hand gesture, the same silent, dismissive wave he had used on her countless times. The irony was devastating. I wasn't seeking revenge, I was seeking structural justice. Her attention then turned to Mr. Harrington, who stood exposed in the room full of eyes. "And Mr. Harrington, while you are not an employee, your consistent pattern of abuse toward the staff, culminating in the humiliation of a server and distracting from critical safety issues, is unacceptable. Effective immediately, you and your company are placed on a permanent service blacklist. The Gilded Plate will no longer serve clients who treat our staff, or any person, with contempt. It was a final, definitive act of poetic justice. She didn't ruin them. She simply removed them from her world, using the ethical standards they lacked as the justification. The entire room exhaled, the staff with relief, the antagonists with cold, profound realization. The true victory wasn't the title. It was the ability to enforce kindness as the ultimate, non-negotiable standard of operation. The immediate aftermath of the announcement was a wave of pure, unfiltered emotion. As Clara stood at the front of the room, now truly in command, the staff broke the silence, not with applause, but with a spontaneous surge of genuine, heartfelt relief. Nina rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, and embraced Clara fiercely, a hug that spoke of years of shared frustration and silent support. It was the human element of the triumph, the moment the invisible became visible and the quiet voices were finally heard. Weeks turned into months. The Gilded Plate underwent a profound transformation, rebranding itself as the Compass Plate. The marble halls remained, but the atmosphere shifted entirely. The staff was empowered, treated with respect, and trained not in cold formality, but in anticipatory, empathetic service, the kind of service Clara's mother had preached. The results were immediate and staggering. Staff retention soared, client satisfaction reached unprecedented levels, and the restaurant, now operating on an ethical foundation, thrived financially. Clara, the COO, moved through the space with the same quiet grace, but now she carried the weight of responsibility, not scorn. Her office was no lavish corner suite. It was a transparent space near the kitchen, keeping her connected to the heartbeat of the operation. On her desk, sitting next to a state-of-the-art laptop, was the single tarnished silver teaspoon, a constant, silent reminder of the only true measure of success. One quiet evening, as the dinner service wound down, Clara saw a familiar, defeated figure standing hesitantly at the host stand. It was Mr. Adler. He looked diminished, his tailored suit now rumpled, his slick exterior finally cracked by the reality of unemployment and failure. He wasn't there to demand anything. He was there seeking a quiet, painful closure. Clara approached him, not with judgment, but with the quiet, professional kindness that was her signature strength. "Mr. Adler," she greeted him softly, "can I help you?" He couldn't meet her eyes. He looked small, like a shadow of the arrogance he once projected. I just wanted to see it," he stammered, gesturing vaguely at the bustling, happy dining room. "See what I missed. You did it, Clara. You built what I always claimed to lead. I was blinded by the price tag. You were guided by the purpose." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean, unused white napkin, folding it neatly on the host stand. "I apologize," he finally said, the word tasting bitter and unfamiliar on his tongue. "I truly believed that kindness was a weakness. Thank you for proving me wrong. I learned more in my forced silence than I did in 20 years of demanding respect." It was a small, quiet moment of human redemption. Clara didn't offer him his job back. That bridge was burned by ethics, not emotion. But she offered him dignity. "The door is always open for those who want to learn true service, Mr. Adler. Find a place that values people and lead with your heart this time." He nodded, a single tear tracking down his cheek, then turned and walked out into the night, free from the crushing weight of his own hubris. Later that week, Clara found herself in the kitchen with Nina, organizing the new system for allergy controls, a system now prioritized above all else. Nina, now the head of staff training, smiled broadly. "It feels different, Clara," Nina whispered. "The food tastes better. The work is harder, but the day ends lighter. It's the kindness, isn't it? It came back to us." Clara leaned against the stainless steel counter, watching the efficient, respectful rhythm of her new team. "I realized that my greatest asset was never my resume. It was my resilience and the belief that decency always creates better business." She had learned that the highest form of elegance wasn't in the crystal or the gold, but in the gesture of making everyone, from the dishwasher to the dearest patron, feel truly seen and valued. She took the small silver spoon from her pocket, turning it in the soft glow of the kitchen light. "This spoon, Nina," Clara said, her voice filled with quiet emotion. "It was never about the value of the metal. It was about the integrity of the delivery. We don't just serve food here, we serve respect. And that, my friend, is how you build an empire that lasts." The scene widens, showing Clara looking out into the beautifully illuminated dining room. The room is no longer a cathedral of cold excess, but a warm, bustling place where joy and respect are palpable. She's wearing a soft, contented smile. She closes her eyes, remembering the painful sting of the dust on her uniform, and then the quiet, fierce promise of the spoon. The pain had been the crucible, the kindness, the gold. Some people shine only when the light goes out, and that's when we finally see them. The story fades on the image of the silver spoon resting on the mahogany desk, a tiny, tarnished symbol of monumental, ethical victory.